Good day, everyone. I hope everyone is having a good day. Today we're going to begin discussing a legal term. I hope everyone is having a good day. Today we're going to dive into due process a little bit further and discuss how due process impacts equality. Remember, as we went over, due process is the fair application and creation of the law. And the question we're asking ourselves through this is, why do we need to be protected from the government? Before we get into equality a little bit more, we're also going to discuss privacy in an upcoming video. And due process really creates these two ideas of the fact that the government shouldn't be involved in our lives, and that when it is, it has to treat everyone the same. Today we're going to just focus on equality. So what do we mean by equality first off? Do we mean economic equality or social status? No, we don't. In a free society, in a place where people are free to make their own choices, there's going to be winners and losers. So certain people are going to have a better economic life and frankly have more than others. That is not what we mean by due process. No. When we talk about due process in the law, we're talking about equality before the law. So that means a couple things. It means equality in a court of law, meaning that everyone is given the same type of process, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case. It might be that there's a jury in certain cases and there's a jury in not certain cases, where everyone has the right to defend themselves, and they also have the choice not to defend themselves. They can remain silent. It means that the police have to secure evidence in a certain manner, and they have to file reports, and they have to follow certain procedures, and that's where we talk about procedural due process. There's also equality in the application of the law, which is substantive due process. This means that when a law is enforced, it has to be enforced equally. So if a group is found violating or harming the environment, the EPA has to go after everyone who does that. They can't just go after certain businesses. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Let's just treat everyone the same, treat every business the same, both when we create the law and when we enforce the law. But there's a long history of complications in the United States. And in many ways, and sometimes it's not that easy to enforce, actually. Take crime statistics, for example, when we look at underage drinking. It's well known that roughly 45% of high school students in the last month have drank at some point. And males are significantly more likely to binge drink than females, in fact. And what I mean by binge drinking is that they are more likely to drink to get drunk specifically. So, should the police, for example, stop high school age males driving to prevent underage drinking, since statistically they are more likely to binge drink? Is that application of the law or not? It's not necessarily a clear answer. And in promoting a better and more perfect union in society, you could argue that, well, the police should be doing that, since underage drinking leads to suicide and decreased grades and health problems, and even prison. So it's a tough thing there. Then looking at Philadelphia. Philadelphia was supposed to be this city of equality, where people came and had access to the street. You know, in Europe, sometimes in certain cities like Paris and London, not everyone had access to the street, and the poorer you were, the less access you had to the street. But Philadelphia wasn't supposed to be that. It was supposed to be a city where everyone could have access to the street, everyone could walk on the roads, no one was segregated. But at the same time, as Philadelphia was being established in the 17th and 18th centuries, Indians were being pushed westward, and slaves from West Africa were being shipped into the city. Then there's the issue of separate but equal. Why isn't that equality? Separate but equal was set up in 1896 by the precedent of Plessy versus Ferguson, which set up segregation between African Americans and white Americans. And we have to ask ourselves from the outset, what is wrong with that? If everyone has the same, gets the same treatment, they get the same schools, and why can't we have black schools and white schools? Well, you might be wondering, why is he even asking a question? It seems obvious. But when it comes to due process, again, we have to look at the fact that it's equality before the law. So why isn't separate but equal or segregation abiding by the standards of due process? Well, we have to look at the purpose, really. And whenever we're looking at a law and whether something's abiding by equality or not, we have to look again at the purpose. This precedent created hostility naturally, really between and probably directed towards African Americans from white Americans at the time. And realistically, when you create hostility, you're creating a country where people can't live and feel safe and are not free to travel in certain areas because it's like, oh, you have your part, we have our part. You keep you over there, you're not allowed to come over here. And that's essentially what happened and how people were treated by the police. And realistically, in practice, and again, the application part of this, it was never really separate and equal. Black schools throughout the first half of the 20th century were well underfunded, well in decay, and were given access to much older materials than their white counterparts. More so, even though this precedent was overturned in Brown versus Board of Education, it still took about 20 years to fully desegregate and even required military intervention and further Supreme Court justices and acts by Congress. Even now, black populations, white populations are still segregated, in fact, more so than they were during that time because of the law's lasting impact. So there's no question, why do we need to be protected from the government, or why do we need to be, why is due process important? It's because naturally the government will treat certain people over others better. And in a democratic society, you have a majority and a minority, and it comes down to the fact that sometimes the minority, in this case it was race, is abused. But it may be political favoritism, or it may be religious groups, or it may be regional differences. And so there's plenty of examples throughout history where the government has treated people better than others, and due process, at least in theory, is meant to protect that. So the question we arises is, should the government then rewrite the wrong, so to speak? In other words, should they push economic equality by law, meaning that wages should be higher for certain people that were discriminated against in the past, or they should have more opportunities to access things than in the past? We're actually going to address that question when we get to something called affirmative action, but it's something I want to leave you hanging with in the meantime. I also wanted to go over some things that seem like they're inequality, but in fact don't violate due process as well. So the law can favor certain people over others, and that might help to answer the previous question I asked. Take gun ownership, for example. In the United States, it's legal everyone has the right to own a gun, but most states now exclude those who have committed the felony, and that's because they are, if you've committed a felony, the logic follows at least that having a gun to someone who's been known to be a dangerous person in the past might not be good for the rest of the society. Men on average, generally speaking, make more than women, and I'm not saying that's right, but we also have to look at the demographics of things with that. So men on average actually have typically higher paying jobs like lawyers, doctors, and whatnot than women on average. Now, does that mean the government should do something to get women into those professions? Possibly, but just because you can see those two statuses does not mean due process has been violated. And again, it depends on the circumstance. If someone was hired for the same job and they're making more money, well, that's a different story. But just to look at the number and say, oh, well, men on average make more than women, that doesn't mean it's necessarily violating due process. Remember, due process is the idea of equality before the law. Schools, what about this example? Schools may spend more on certain school sports than others. They may give money more to a basketball team than they do to a volleyball team. And that may be because there's more people actually accessing that sport than the other, and that's why they get more money. So again, it's not necessarily a violation of due process in that sense. Generally speaking, the government actually can restrict certain equalities before the law if there is a compelling public interest, and we see that with restricting gun ownership, for example. Ultimately, the 14th Amendment and due process and the due process clauses under it are instrumental in promoting equality for all citizens. It gives us protection from the government for discriminating against us and treats us unfairly. And we obviously see numerous inequalities in America in the past and in today. But the question we must ask, however, when is it the government's place to intervene? And does intervening actually create inequality? And we'll talk about that with a couple of examples moving forward.